Digital disruption is having an enormous impact on industries everywhere. There's a couple of fundamental ideas that underpin digitisation that help us understand why it's having that impact. The first is that when you can reduce something to a string of ones or zeros, you can move it almost anywhere instantly. And so it changes the dynamics of communication, and that matters for simple, relatively simple things like digitisation of phone calls, but it's also true for things like the digitisation of money. So we used to think of money as something that we had in our wallet. These days, the way that money moves around the planet is as ones and zeros. It's digitised. And that means there's no transaction cost in that. The banks would like us to think differently, but there's no transaction cost in that. And it happens instantly at almost no cost. The next thing is that when you reduce things to digital states, digital content, the marginal cost equation changes, because once something is digitised, the marginal cost of the next unit is effectively zero. So one of the easy ways to understand this is to think about what's happened in the music industry. So back when I was a lad, there were records, and to make a record, let's say that cost $5 to print the vinyl and so on. Then we went to CDs and the cost came down to maybe $2. But where we went to next was MP3 music. Now, MP3 music has that quality that the marginal cost of the next unit is zero. And so once you've got the track, you can distribute it in the way that we mentioned a moment ago, almost anywhere instantly at no cost. And that has had a huge impact on the music industry. So we saw initially a whole lot of bootleg sites that let you download those things for free, but then Apple came along and put a legal and reputable system around that, so people would pay a certain amount of money for each track. Also, the next thing though, which is where I think young people are today, is that we moved into the streaming world, where you don't actually buy the music anymore, you pay a subscription for listening to the music. And there are many services out there, quite legal ones, where you don't even pay for that streaming. And that's the other big impact of digitisation. It takes us to a world of zero marginal cost, and our brains don't cope terribly well with that, because we've got this model in our head that the way we would price something is we'd say, well, it costs this much to make it, we'll put a bit of a margin on top and that'll be okay. When things have a zero marginal cost, that traditional thinking doesn't work. And so between the ability to move things almost instantly anywhere and the zero marginal cost piece, digitisation's driving enormous change. Not least, it allows new players to enter industries in a way that wasn't possible before. We see this in marketing, for example. We see this in the impact of the cost of building a brand. The digitisation of that marketing world means that Uber or Airbnb, just to pick two examples, can build a brand relatively cheaply compared to what it used to cost large incumbent players to do that. There are a number of pieces to understanding how incumbent players should respond. The first, which sounds really trivial, but actually happens far too rarely, is organisations need to understand what their core capabilities are, because that's your starting point. And unless you're clear about what those core capabilities are, you won't be able to understand what are the gaps between those capabilities and where you need to be to respond appropriately in a digitised world. How you bridge that gap is an important piece, so understanding it and then how you might bridge it. And you can do that by adding on, building in the resources to your own business. You can do it by forming alliances with other parties who have those digitisation skills, either by contracting with them to do the work for you, or forming alliances in a joint venture way so you both learn as you explore the space, or You can also buy, you can do in an M&A sense an acquisition of a company that's got capabilities that you need in order to function appropriately in a digitised world. The other piece of this that matters though is that we're not always clear what those future capabilities might be. And so it's in one way easy to think about how we might build the capabilities we need for today. A more important and more difficult challenge is how do we start building now for the capabilities that we'll need in the future? And it's that piece that's the tricky part of the puzzle. And so the way that large players respond effectively there is by obviously scanning the environment so they understand what's happening, but also taking small stakes in players, companies, startups that look like they might have the technology that might be useful for the future needs of the business. And that provides incumbent players with some cheap options on the future that they can then work with and exercise as the environment changes.